This is not a drill, and I am not exaggerating. What we are witnessing between General Motors and the Canadian government is one of the most explosive and high-stakes corporate showdowns in modern history. If you are an American worker, a stock market investor, or just someone who cares about where the North American economy is headed, you need to stop what you are doing and pay close attention. This story is moving at lightning speed, it is getting incredibly ugly, and the fallout is going to create a ripple effect across the entire continent for decades to come. We are watching a fundamental breakdown in the relationship between one of the world's largest automakers and a G7 nation, and the consequences for the middle class are devastating. General Motors is not just any company, it is an absolute icon of American industry. This is the company that helped win World War II and literally put the world on wheels. But right now, GM has decided to gut its operations in Canada, and the scale of the destruction is hard to wrap your head around. They recently made the brutal decision to slash an entire production shift at their legendary Oshawa assembly plant in Ontario. By doing this, they didn't just cut costs, they threw 500 direct employees out the door. But the damage doesn't stop at the factory gates. When you factor in the massive web of supply chain workers, parts manufacturers, and local small businesses that survive solely because of that plant, the real number is much higher. We are talking about over 1,200 people who woke up with high-quality, good-paying manufacturing jobs and went to bed that same night with absolutely nothing but an unemployment check. But here is the most alarming part of this story. This was not an isolated incident or a one-time mistake. This is part of a calculated, aggressive pattern. Just a few months ago, back in October, GM made an even bigger move by completely shutting down their entire BrightDrop electric van operation at the Cami assembly plant in Ingersoll, Ontario. That single decision wiped out over 1,000 jobs in one go. If you are keeping track, that is 2 massive plant cuts in less than 6 months. In total, over 2,000 Canadian manufacturing jobs have simply evaporated into thin air. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These are 2,000 families whose lives have been turned upside down because a multi-billion-dollar corporation decided to pivot its strategy overnight. The reason GM is giving for these mass layoffs is that they need to realign production to survive a changing trade environment. But you need to understand what that actually means in plain English. It means the 25% import duties and massive tariffs currently being slapped on vehicles crossing the border have made it too expensive for GM to keep these Canadian workers on the payroll. Instead of absorbing those costs or finding a way to make it work, GM is choosing to abandon the very workers who have built their trucks for generations. This is a total collapse of the status quo in the auto industry, and it signals a new era where corporate loyalty to a region or a workforce is completely dead. When General Motors talks about realigning production to survive an evolving trade environment, you need to understand exactly what that means in plain English. It is code for a brutal tariff war. We are currently seeing a 25% import duty slapped on vehicles crossing the border, a policy that has fundamentally broken the math for building cars in Canada and selling them in the United States. For decades, the border was essentially invisible for the auto industry, allowing parts and vehicles to move back and forth freely. But those days are over. GM is now staring at billions of dollars in new costs, and instead of taking the hit to their profits, they are passing the entire bill down to the workers by shutting down Canadian lines and moving that production to the US to escape the tax. But if GM thought they could just take the money and run, they were dead wrong. The Canadian government is officially striking back with a level of aggression we haven't seen in years. Industry Minister Mélanie Joly recently went on national television and issued a massive public ultimatum to General Motors. Her message was direct and cold. The Canadian government is going to claw back every single dollar of public funding and taxpayer subsidies that were ever given to the company. She made it crystal clear that these hundreds of millions of dollars were handed over with a specific job guarantee attached. Since GM is now moving those jobs to places like Indiana, the Canadian government views this as a total breach of contract. They aren't just sending a stern letter, they are moving to legally seize that money back for the taxpayers. This isn't just tough talk for the cameras. The Canadian government has already proven they are willing to go to war. Just weeks ago, they served an official notice of default to Stellantis for idling their plant in Brampton and moving production to the US. This is a massive, coordinated policy shift in how governments deal with multinational corporations. For too long, companies have taken government handouts and then abandoned those same communities the moment the wind changed. Now Ottawa is setting a new precedent. If you take public money to build a future in a country and then walk away from its workers, you will be hunted down for every cent. We are witnessing a historic seismic shift, where the era of consequence-free corporate relocation is officially over. To understand the real motive behind these massive layoffs, you have to look directly across the border at what is happening in the United States. While General Motors was busy cutting an entire production shift and firing hundreds of people in Canada, they were simultaneously hiring 250 new workers at their assembly plant in Fort Wayne, Indiana. This is not a coincidence. Both the Oshawa plant in Canada and the Fort Wayne plant in Indiana build the exact same vehicle, the Chevrolet Silverado. By making this move, GM effectively shifted 50,000 units of truck production off Canadian soil and moved it directly into the U.S. interior. At first glance, a casual observer might think this is a huge win for American workers because the jobs are coming home, but when you look at the actual contract details, the reality is much more disturbing. The catch that nobody is talking about is the status of these new American jobs. The 250 people GM hired in Indiana are not full-time permanent employees with a path to a career. They are classified as temporary workers. This is a critical distinction that changes everything. These temporary workers do not receive the same hourly pay as the veteran Canadian workers who were just let go. They do not get the same high-level health benefits. They don't have the same retirement contributions, and most importantly, they have zero job security. GM can let them go at a moment's notice without the massive severance packages or union battles that would typically follow a permanent plant closure. By doing this, GM isn't just moving production to avoid tariffs. They are using the trade war as a convenient excuse to permanently lower their labor costs. This reveals the cold, hard truth of the situation. General Motors is using trade policy as a smokescreen to restructure their entire workforce. They are taking high-paying, stable jobs with benefits from one country and replacing them with low-wage, temporary positions in another. In this scenario, the corporation is the only entity that actually comes out ahead. They dodge the 25% import tax by building the trucks in the US, and they save millions more by paying the new American workers significantly less than the Canadian ones. It is a double win for the corporate bottom line, but a massive loss for the middle class on both sides of the border. The result is a race to the bottom that leaves everyone vulnerable. The Canadian workers are left with no income and a devastated local economy, while the new American workers are left in a revolving door position where they are paid less to do the same amount of work with no long-term future. This is why you cannot simply look at the headline and assume moving to Indiana is a victory for the American worker. When a company uses political chaos to exploit labor markets, the workers in both countries end up getting squeezed. GM is proving that they will chase the lowest possible cost regardless of the human impact, using the tariff situation as the perfect cover to execute a plan they likely had in place for years. This brings us to Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha, and the single most successful investor in history. When Buffett talks, the entire financial world stops what it's doing and listens. He isn't just a casual observer. He is someone who put his money where his mouth was by purchasing 10 million shares of General Motors back in 2017. For years he held that position, but by late 2023, he had completely exited the stock. To understand why he dumped every single share, you have to understand the fundamental philosophy that he and his late partner, Charlie Munger, preached for decades. They long maintained that the auto industry is simply too tough of a business to be in for the long haul. In plain English, the auto industry is a brutal place to make a profit because the margins are razor thin and the capital requirements are massive. To build a car, you have to spend billions of dollars on factories, research, and specialized equipment before you ever see a single cent of profit. On top of that, the regulatory environment is a total minefield of changing safety and environmental laws. Buffett realized that even when an automaker is doing well, they are constantly one bad economy or one major trade shift away from disaster. When you add a 25% tariff on top of those already thin profit margins, the math completely breaks. Buffett saw this coming and decided that the risk was no longer worth the reward, leading him to sell off his entire stake in GM before the current crisis fully erupted. Buffett hasn't been quiet about his feelings on the current state of global trade either. At his 2025 and 2026 shareholder meetings, he issued a chilling warning to the world, stating clearly that trade should not be a weapon. He warned that using tariffs as a tool for economic aggression is a big mistake that creates long-term instability. He went as far as to call aggressive trade wars an act of war in an economic sense, noting that they lead to poor outcomes and bitter attitudes between nations. His logic is simple. When you have 300 million Americans bragging about their success while billions of people in the rest of the world feel excluded or attacked by trade policies, you are creating a dangerous global environment that eventually hurts everyone. Today, the proof of Buffett's concern is in his bank account. As of early 2026, Berkshire Hathaway is sitting on a staggering, record-breaking cash pile of over $380 billion. Think about that for a second. The greatest investor of our lifetime has nearly $400 billion in liquid cash, just sitting on the sidelines in treasury bills. He isn't buying more GM, he isn't buying more tech, and he isn't rushing into the market. He is sitting on that cash because he does not see enough stability or attractively priced investments in an economy defined by trade wars and unpredictable tariffs. When the man who built a trillion-dollar empire decides it is safer to hold cash than to own American industry, it is a flashing red warning light that the storm clouds we are seeing now are only the beginning. The crisis we are seeing today goes far deeper than just a trade war over trucks. It is the total and complete failure of the electric vehicle transition as we knew it. General Motors recently shocked the financial world by taking a massive $7.2 billion write-down on its electric vehicle business. In simple terms, a write-down means the company admitted that the billions they spent on EV factories and technology are now worth significantly less because the sales they expected simply did not happen. GM poured massive amounts of money into a future that consumers haven't bought into yet, and now they are forced to eat those costs. This isn't just a minor accounting error, it is a financial disaster that proves the EV revolution has hit a brick wall. The perfect example of this failure is the BrightDrop plant in Ingersoll, Ontario. This factory was supposed to be the crown jewel of GM's future, built specifically to churn out 50,000 electric delivery vans every year. But the reality on the ground was a nightmare. In 2024, they sold fewer than 2,000 vans, and even as we moved through 2025, the numbers barely moved. When you build a massive factory designed for 50,000 units, and you only sell a tiny fraction of that, the plant becomes an expensive ghost town. Between the lack of customer interest and the new 25% tariffs making these vans even more expensive to ship, GM decided to pull the plug entirely and shut the operation down. This failure has pushed the anger on the ground to a terrifying boiling point. Lana Payne, the president of Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union, has come out swinging. She officially accused General Motors of corporate appeasement, claiming the company is sacrificing Canadian families just to play nice with the US administration and its trade policies. The union isn't just making speeches either. They are preparing for a physical confrontation. Local union leaders, including Mike Van Bukel at the Ingersoll plant, have publicly stated that if GM tries to remove a single piece of manufacturing equipment from that factory, the workers are ready to physically occupy the building. Think about the weight of that. It is now 2026, and we have blue-collar workers in North America prepared to seize a factory and refuse to leave just to protect their livelihoods. They know that once the machinery is gone, the plant is dead forever, and their community will never recover. For these families, this isn't a strategic realignment or a market shift. It is an existential threat. They are watching their futures being traded away on a corporate balance sheet, and they have decided that they are not going to go quietly. The human cost of this failed EV bet is now manifesting as a desperate, high-stakes standoff that could change the face of labor relations for the next generation. As General Motors pulls its operations out of Canada, a massive vacuum is being created in the North American manufacturing landscape, and it is being filled by players who have a very different vision for the future. While GM is retreating, Toyota is doubling down. Toyota has just invested over $1.1 billion into its Ontario facilities to launch the production of the all-new 2026 RAV4. This is a massive statement of confidence in the Canadian workforce, but it also highlights a growing divide. While some companies are running away from the trade chaos, others are trying to plant their flag even deeper. However, the most shocking development isn't coming from Japan, it's coming from China. In a move that could change the geopolitical map forever, the Canadian government has recently struck a landmark deal with Beijing. After years of high tensions, Canada has agreed to drastically lower tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, dropping them from over 100% down to just 6.1% for a specific quota of vehicles. In exchange, China is opening its doors to Canadian agricultural exports like canola. This means that by the end of 2026, Chinese auto giants like BYD, Chery, and Geely will be landing their cars on Canadian soil. This is a nightmare scenario for American policymakers. If China establishes a manufacturing or retail beachhead in Canada while American companies like GM are leaving, the entire North American auto market will be flipped on its head. We are looking at a fundamental shift where the big three could be replaced by global competitors who are willing to play by a different set of rules. For you, the average consumer, this new era of economic nationalism translates into one thing: a massive affordability crisis. Industry experts and top executives are now sounding the alarm that the billions of dollars in tariff costs are not being swallowed by the corporations, they are being passed directly to you. A 25% tariff on a $40,000 truck doesn't just disappear, it adds thousands of dollars to the sticker price at the dealership. We are seeing estimates that the average new car price could jump by anywhere from $2,500 to over $10,000 out of the gates because of these trade wars. Car prices, which are already at record highs, now have nowhere to go but up. Even used car prices will stay high because as new cars become unaffordable, more people will fight over the limited supply of older vehicles. We are officially witnessing the end of an era of seamless, invisible North American manufacturing. For 30 years, parts and cars moved between the US, Canada, and Mexico as if the borders didn't exist. That system is dead. It has been replaced by a world where trade is a weapon, where every cross-border shipment is a political statement, and where workers are the primary casualties in the crossfire. The American auto industry was built on a foundation of stability, long-term planning, and regional partnership. Today, that foundation is not just cracking, it is shattering. And the most terrifying part of this entire story is that despite all the chaos, neither the politicians in Washington and Ottawa, the CEOs in Detroit, nor the union leaders on the ground seem to have a real plan for what happens next.